for those following the Hans Niemann cheating drama in the chess world, one of the second tier of headlines under the top five says that Niemann likely cheated in 100 games, much more often than he acknowledged. An investigation finds. Oh boy, oh boy. Well, now we know why Magnus was refusing to blame. Okay, those are your big boring tech headlines. Russia and China and
Non-tech
Iran.
headlines, you mean?
Non-tech headlines, yes. That the anti-West axis uh, is still uh, falling on a bit of a slippery slope. And now onto this article, which is one of the five from the BBC. It said, I'll pin it. There it goes. 5 reasons why China's economy is in trouble. China's economy is slowing down and as it adapts to a punishing zero COVID strategy and a weakening global demand. Zero COVID is wreaking havoc. Beijing isn't doing enough. China's property market is in crisis. Climate change is making matters worse. China's tech titans are losing investors. So the property market and COVID, so they list COVID as number one and China's property market as number three. And it's very similar to what I said before this Chinese collapse was really underway. I said, watch out. China's likely to go into a very serious economic collapse, and it will be due to the convergence of COVID and their economy for lay people is overly based on the real estate market, which is in a real difficult situation. And if that bubble pops during COVID, this could set the stage for a serious downward spiral, which now has come. Now we're now in the middle of that downward spiral. And yeah, and now BBC is writing articles about it, and it's a little more obvious to everybody as usual. But yeah, not they're correct in mentioning the tech slide as well, which is in a weird way due to Beijing's neurotic need for control. Um, Although perhaps, yeah, I mean, you got to do what you got to do if you're going to be total authoritarian. You got to make sure you're the one with all the control, and tech had a lot of control. It was an existential threat to the party. Yeah, so that is another one of the factors, and indeed, climate change is another. So kudos to the BBC on this article, whoever wrote it, Suranjana Tiwari. What a cool name! Um, well done. So that's the article pinned at the top of the room. Yeah, but you knew that was coming 6, 7 months ago when I said China would likely end up here at this stage, and they're not able to support Russia, and nor is Iran able to support Russia in the ways that I'm sure Russia would appreciate. And Russia's not able to support China. And so we're a little overdue for a little more American escalation on the Taiwan issue at this moment. So I would not be surprised to see an interesting maneuver. You know, like when you go to Vegas and you watch the roulette wheel results where it shows what number came on the roulette wheel for the past 20 spins, and you notice sometimes there's these streaks of black or red or odd numbers or even numbers. And after you get 10 blacks in a row on a roulette table, you start getting the feeling that maybe we're going to start seeing, the color might change. We're a little overdue. 10 in a row is kind of interesting. And of course, every next spin is 50-50, as I'm sure Ben is thinking. But once I start seeing long streaks of odds or evens or highs or lows or blacks or reds, I start thinking we're overdue for it to turn back the other way. And I get a similar feeling about China, and America is now in a good position to be able to kind of poke the panda once or twice at this moment. So why not take advantage of the opportunity? poke the panda while it's down. So anyway, those are the big boring. No, is there any other non-tech headlines? Although another, this is tech, obviously. Let's see. It might even be the top tech story of the day. I bet it is. The Elon Musk doing Twitter. Yep, yes, it is. It's top tech story. So we'll go ahead and save that. We'll start the stream. The stream has started. We'll do the audio. Does anyone have a non-tech story before I ring the air horn and we jump into the tech stories? Let me go through our private back channel chats to see if anyone shared anything really good. Oh, Japan is kicking out the Russian consulate as ties worsen over Ukraine. And what's really going on is Russia is supporting North Korea in that missile launch that just happened, which Japan is not so happy about. North Korea launching missiles over Japan, as you might imagine. And so because the Kremlin is supporting North Korea, Japan's like, get the hell out of our country if you're going to support Korea, you fucking crackheads. So I don't blame Japan in this case. This is an existential threat type scenario. You don't need people, with friends like that. You know what I mean? What a weird access between North Korea, Iran, China, and Russia. And the crazy part is they try and make themselves out to be the good guys. That's what's just so crazy about this. On this point, China just had a demonstration in the middle of Beijing of their intercontinental ballistic missiles. By the way, their ICBM nuclear bombs are showcasing them for no apparent reason. Although the geopolitical strategists say that it's an obvious sort of hint to the West that China's ready, and able to throw down. Wild. Can you imagine America rolling its nuclear long-range nuclear bomb capabilities through the middle of, Washington D.C. or Times Square or something? It's just so weird.
But I will say that I heard a conversation this morning saying that if China tried to take back Taiwan, Taiwan would have to have all of its artillery ready and stacked in advance. Because
Currently parked in my cutout. I need you to move your car.
oh, okay.
Okay. Copying this.
Don't park there, Dr. Francine.
Yeah, I'm ready for the tech stories. One last chance for anyone with a non-tech story. Okay, good enough. So, wait, what was that?
Well, again, it's difficult to resupply Taiwan.
Yes.
If a war starts.
True.
Yeah, so that's why now we have this Taiwan Policy Act of 2022, because if it's passed in the next 4 years, the American administration will provide more than $4.5 billion of weaponry. So hope it will be passed. But yeah, and it's like an ad. It's not a law. So that also shows the okay. Let's go to
time's up. Here we go. Top tech story today, as I assumed, is in a letter to Twitter, Elon Musk revives his original bid for $54.20 per share, aiming to avoid a courtroom fight. Twitter stock rises 20%. I think it was 22% actually. And Elon Musk is proposing to buy Twitter for the original offer price. And interestingly, he also just tweeted out, since we met last time, that here it is, very concise. Buying Twitter. Well, hold on. Before I read the tweet, didn't some tech bro come in here and predict that what Elon is really up to with regard to Twitter is building the WeChat of the West, kind of a super app that would be based on Twitter with commerce, and it would be like a PayPal 3.0. Does this sound familiar to any of the regular tech newsers on stage as to what when he first made the original offer many months ago, that what I secretly suggested what he had in mind is to build a super app like a WeChat of the West. Does anyone recall that?
Mm-hmm.
You do. Okay, well, very interesting, because the tweet he just twatted says buying Twitter is an accelerant to creating X, the everything app, as you can see at the top of the room. So I'm going to go ahead and pat myself. I'm going to break my damn arm patting myself on the back, because I knew that's why he wanted to buy this, because, as I said at the time, he did PayPal. And PayPal's dream was to become what WeChat is in Asia, which is it's used for paying for everything between products and services and content and ordering rides and paying your rent and settling bills at restaurants and paying the restaurant and all of it. And you can only do that when you've got everybody's connection and all the companies are on there, all the people are on there, their identities are on there, and there's payments between them, and there's stores on there. And yeah, Twitter could be a shortcut, as I said, to enabling that kind of PayPal, 3.0 type scenario. And then Elon just tweeted in the past 24 hours that that's what he wants to make, is the everything app. And
Yeah, but I mean, that's a big build.
yes,
It,
it is.
and it, in some ways, you're better off starting from scratch.
Yeah, but to build the Twitter network of relationships and it would take a lot of time and cost, and the infrastructure that is
Well, and
stable
it
at this
needs
point.
payment. It needs payment rails.
Yeah, but it does have some payment functionality now. It does have some shopping functionality now in beta that they're about to roll out. So it could become the easiest way to sell stuff in the very, very, very near future, both digital stuff and physical stuff. Because one of the easiest ways from scratch, like a family member says, I've got a pair of shoes I want to sell. And at the moment, the easiest way to do that might be
Facebook Marketplace.
Facebook Marketplace. Thank you, Ben. That's what I was reaching for. And it's surprising. It could be there should be an easier way than that. And Twitter could make an easier way than that. And I think they are going to do that. And it's going to be more visible. And yeah, so I think that is a huge opportunity to be really the place that can allow people to sell things and create an online store in less than a minute. And I literally do mean an actual minute. Twitter could do that. I mean, assuming you have the Twitter account already. The Facebook one would take a little more than a minute, and that 30 seconds can make all the difference. And of course, the ability to connect you with the people who want to buy the product that you have to sell, that's the difficult bit. But
Well, I
How
think
many users does Twitter have now? 200 million?
yeah, about 250. Yeah. Anywho, so Lex Friedman tweets to Elon saying, I'm really happy see you buying Twitter and emphasizing the importance of great engineering. There's a lot of improvements that can make this platform better at helping humanity flourish. A culture of innovation and excellence in engineering is essential for that. Somebody said exactly what Dr. Francine just said and responded to Elon saying, I think it would have been easier to just start X from scratch, though. Elon Musk replied saying Twitter probably accelerates X by 3 to 5 years, but I could be wrong. Okay. And as
Well,
some,
if it's
yeah.
anything like home building, it's easier to start and build a new house and faster than it is to renovate an old one because you continually discover new things that need to be fixed in an old house. And to me, Twitter's like an old house. I mean,
And
I
you
love
have
Twitter.
to and you have to deal with the HR issues too. I think many people will be let go. Those who cannot align to his vision.
Well, I think it allows Elon to exploit the momentum that he has with Tesla and the momentum that already exists with Twitter, and he has something like 100 million followers. So, with respect to like brand and trust and network effects, these are all the classic points that Peter Thiel discusses are critical. And I think starting with those rather than making them from scratch, especially since he got all this free publicity for this so-called drama. Whoever you talk to has a different opinion about it, but I think it was like a bunch of free marketing, and in the end, not everyone is injured, or like the company will recover. So I think it was an interesting play.
Okay, so there's a whole incredible amount of tweets, as you can imagine. Twitter issued a statement about today's news saying, "We received a letter from Musk parties which they have filed with the SEC. The intention of the company is to close the transaction at $54.20 per share." And there's just too many people tweeting about it. Kara Swisher says he was going to have to pay one way or the other as he was not going to win in Delaware, so he might as well own it as he agreed to.
Does that mean that Jay Cal and his buddies are all in?
Good question. Because one bit of news yesterday that we didn't read was a bunch of the Elon Musk chat history was revealed in the court case, and journalists got their hands on that. And one of the interesting parts that got reported by some outlets was that Jason, who's one of Elon's better friends, and as the journalists even say, is probably the most, he appears more in Elon's Twitter chat history than anybody, offered to be CEO of Twitter. He said, "Put me in as the CEO if you want. Like I would be my dream to do that or whatever." And I sent a message to Jason as well after Elon did the tweet about the Everything app, which I knew was the plan all along. That if I would be happy to participate in that initiative with whatever team is focused on precisely that vision of, and as you're saying, it's going to be a massive undertaking because it's a big ship to try and turn, and they've got all, everyone's correctly stating, there's a ton of
He'll
info.
need all his friends.
So it'll be an interesting undertaking for sure. But that's, to me, that there's that to do the WeChat of the West is such a huge opportunity, and it could make Twitter 20 times bigger than it is today. It could become the most important app. So anyway, there's a bunch of related articles, like Elon claims that buying Twitter is an accelerant. Yep, we covered that. New York Times says a look at possible outcomes for Twitter under Elon Musk: firing the current CEO, Parag Agrawal, revolts by employees, bringing back Donald Trump, adding new features, and more, implying it could all be a very bumpy ride. Yeah, it very much could be. Reuters says they have sources that Elon and Twitter have not yet reached an agreement to end the litigation. Bloomberg says Musk's revived Twitter acquisition could rely on $12 billion from banks at a time when offloading risky debt is difficult, potentially leading to losses. A Delaware judge says Twitter can proceed with a limited probe to see if Peter Zatko, the former head of security, contacted Elon Musk's lawyers before Musk backed out of the deal. And that's that topic. So now we can go to the next big topic, which is Blizzard president Mike Ybarra says that Overwatch 2 is experiencing a mass DDoS attack on its servers, preventing hundreds of users from joining the game's launch. Okay. Nikkei Japan says they have sources that in a first, Apple asks suppliers to move some AirPods and Beats production to India as early as next year, 2-3 months from now. Some AirPods are already being made in Vietnam. So, why is Apple pressuring its suppliers to move out of China?
Yeah, we were talking about this yesterday.
We talk about
I
it every
mean,
day.
if
and it's a very
no
obvious.
wonder, no wonder it sounds familiar.
Yeah, this old song again. So, and there was a really good article that even had data point of how many of their suppliers had moved, and it was a very significant percentage have already moved already in the past 12 months, and yet they're still pushing more suppliers to get out because they have so many different products. Like they're already pushing the iPhone out and the MacBooks, and now they're pushing out the AirPods and Beats production, and they're telling everyone get out of China. It's called de-risking. Credit to Cal for coining that one. And they're not going to stop until everybody's out because they see the big picture. We knew Apple knows the big picture. Of course, Apple's talking with the White House more than anybody. Apple's talking with the White House, and of course they know what's going on at the highest levels. It's no now you know why people like Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk selling shares of their own companies that they swore they would never do. Elon only owns shares in one company, Tesla. He swore he would never sell them. He sold them in November, right before the whole fucking market took a huge shit. You don't think he's got some inside info? And Jeff Bezos has some inside info? You don't think Apple's got some inside info where geopolitics is going? Of course they do. And we said that 6 months ago. It'll be interesting to see what Apple does. I'll bet they start moving out of China. And sure as shit, they're pushing not only themselves, but all of their suppliers out of China. Because it's game over. It's game effing over. We are done with China, period. Every day there's more articles about more cutting off, not sanctions, but insisting that companies cannot do business with China. What is that other than sanctions? That's under another name. So chip makers cannot AI. Anyone doing anything in AI and chips is going to be forbidden or verboten from doing business with China. We are kneecapping China technologically, and more importantly, we're telling everybody who is doing anything truly innovative to block your doors, use hardware safety keys, and everything else, because China's going to try and do what China's done since day one, which is steal all that intellectual property. And now we know what the game is. And we're going to try and steal their way to the top, and we're not having none of that. And
But
Biden,
isn't this 10 years too late? I mean, don't they have
we're doing it.
a lot of our.
It's a great question. It's a great question. Should we have done it 10 years ago? Absolutely. Is it too late? It might be. It might. Boy, did we really run it right to the midnight, 11:59 to decide to do this now. And strangely, Trump was very vocal about this. And I think as I'm making a non-political point here, but just as a taking a non-American perspective here, that he should probably people just can't bring themselves to give him any credit for anything. But on the China point, I imagine in his next presidential campaign, if he ever has one, he'll be relying heavily on how he did take this posture when it was rather unconventional to do so, and now it's an official U.S. policy to do this full steam.
Right.
And
He was right about China. He definitely was. And I'll be curious whether Xi's, do you call it an election? What's happening with him now with the party meeting and
confirmation.
is it,
Was he right about
uh,
Russia? I mean, come on. I think we're giving him too much credit for a broken clock being right twice a day. It's obvious for
Great
the last
comeback, David.
15 years China's an enemy
Yeah, that's a great
from
comeback.
intellectual property theft. Come on, guys. This is nothing new. It's populism winning an argument that he adopted. Who cares?
I think there's an interesting point here to know, like how some researchers view the issue with China. So I've been to a few talks, and the joke is something like, "Yeah, China's behind America. How much? 24 hours. Because when we go to sleep, they get to work copying the files." And even though that's a somewhat like perhaps negative stance, I think the point of these moves right now are to then extend that gap. So it's more than 24 hours. It's going to be maybe a year now. So it's a year gap, a 2 year gap, 3 year gap, because it seems that they got too close to our innovation edge without necessarily having the requisite infrastructure, for example. So I think you can get ahead, but to then truly innovate, you have to have that infrastructure. And so long term, the established party, the US, was losing because China was just cutting ahead a little bit without necessarily having to make the same kind of investments or even in making the same kind of culture of innovation. So I think it's an interesting move because it addresses the kind of subtle difference in perhaps how most people should view China's plagiarism of U.S. tech.
oh, this is another non-tech story, Tyler. I'm sorry, but this is about the NYU professor who was fired because 25% of his students were unhappy with their grades. And so they petitioned the university, and the university fired this guy, some legendary professor who came to NYU from Princeton.
Mm-hmm.
So, Tech Advantage, innovation, baloney. We have a lazy student body.
Mm.
But Tyler, about this 10
Yeah,
years
one can just look at the
ago,
high-speed trains and all of the infrastructure that China has that America would love to have, but doesn't.
BB, you're
I just want to say that she uh, was positioned as his first chairman in 2013, and back then he hadn't. I mean, at that time, nobody knew. Maybe he himself knew that he's gonna be. He's trying to be the chairman of Chinese Communist Party forever. So, I mean, 10 years ago, all the Western industries didn't see this coming. So at
right.
that time, yeah, China still like right now, even right now, China, Apple, I mean, China has this 18% of market that iPhone has this 18% market China. So that is still a huge revenue for Apple.
Yeah.
So I mean, 10 years ago, because the question was why this kind of discoupling wasn't started 10 years ago, because back then she still feels like he's it's like a compete, but at the same time cooperate with the Western world. So even back then, the Mr. Abe, the Japanese late prime minister, tried to make friend with him. So the political atmosphere was very different from now, and that's why something I want to supplement.
Yeah, it wasn't. We were still hopeful. So the next big article is from the Wall Street Journal, It's this chess story, and they're making it a text story because the source of the information is from chess.com. It says a report from chess.com alleges widespread cheating in more than 100 online games by Hans Niemann, who was accused of cheating by champion Magnus Carlsen. So if you haven't been following this, and strangely I have been, it started a couple weeks ago when Magnus in the game lost to Neiman and uh, basically, withdrew and from the competition, and which he's never done in his entire career, and that was very strange. And when asked for comment, he says, "I can't say why." And then they had a follow-up match in another competition a week or so after that, in which Magnus, this kind of the Michael Jordan of chess, um, after two moves, resigns, which again is super uncharacteristic of him, and it's just particularly odd given what he just did to Neiman, in the last meeting in the week prior. And then he made a statement, but what I happen to know something that I don't think the Wall Street Journal is even going to report. Let me see if they do. Let me crack this story open. Cheryl kindly pinned it to the top of the room. But now I'm really confident about what I'm about to share because of this article, which is I knew a week ago that Magnus didn't have any super concrete proof that Neiman was cheating in the match where he lost, in the match where Neiman won. If he had super concrete proof, of course, he would reveal it and it would be used against him and he would never be able to play chess ever again. But why did he feel confident in his decision to remove himself from the competition, which, by the way, is his own competition? He's kind of the boss of that competition. And why do in the following game, quit after two moves, unless he knew, and now Neiman came out after, in the middle of that, and revealed, okay, no, I did. He claimed I didn't cheat, but I have previously in my life twice, and that's it. And I swear up and down I didn't cheat, and I won him fair and square and whatever. Now, what gave Magnus the confidence to make these really bold moves that are shaking the chess world? This is not tech news really related at all, and that's why I wasn't having these conversations in this room. But in my mind, the dots that I was connecting was Magnus had sold a company to chess.com not that long ago. And that might have given him access to data that chess.com has, because they host all of these games online that Neiman himself plays in. Now, these online games that occur have lots of incredibly impressive ways of detecting cheating, because it's, as you can imagine, very difficult to cheat in a live tournament in person. It's far more easier to cheat sitting at your laptop at home, when you could have a second device next to you that could be giving you supercomputer advice, right? So, but they have figured out ways to minimize and to detect this cheating to some degree, with some degree of success. And that's why I thought, what's going to come out next? Whatever Magnus must have got some intel from chess.com about Hans Niemann's style of play online, and that they know that he's cheating rather regularly. And that's what, with that intel, with knowledge now that Hans is regularly cheating in online, then he has reason to be suspicious when he's playing him in person. And that gave him the confidence, to bow out of the tournament and resign after 2 moves and kind of refuse to play him, basically, because he's very confident that this guy cheats regularly. Well, how could he know that? Well, only chess.com could have known that. Oh, what a coincidence that he just sold his company to chess.com, thus potentially giving him access to some kind of proprietary data or intel. And now the headline today is chess.com did an investigation and is revealing that in the report reviewed by the Wall Street Journal, alleges that Neiman likely received illegal assistance in more than 100 online games as recently as 2020. Those
Ouch.
matches included contests in which prize money was on the line. The site uses a variety of cheating detection tools, including analytics that compare moves to those recommended by chess engines, which are capable of beating even the greatest human players every time. The report states that Neiman privately confessed to the allegations and that he was subsequently banned from the site for a period of time. That's something that chess.com would have known and nobody else. And that's my point, is Magnus got access to that very important intel as a result of selling his company to chess.com. And now,
Tyler?
but by the way, I don't think the Wall Street Journal, even in this article, is even connecting the final dot or tying the final knot with the cherry on top that I'm presenting to you, which is, okay, the headline is that chess.com is revealing this. I knew that this existed before it was revealed because something gave Magnus the confidence to do this. I assumed it could only be from chess.com. Now chess.com reveals this. The final reveal is that Magnus had access to this before we just did today. But they're not revealed. They're not saying that. They're not saying that he does. Go ahead.
Tyler,
Of course not.
quick aside, and want to hear. The founder of chess.com is Eric Albest, who is a classmate of mine. He happens to be one of the smartest in our class who did not bother doing anything else but build his platform during the time in class, and it's a huge money maker, as you can imagine. I just checked our class WhatsApp group, and he was commenting that this report was going to drop. And so it's funny, as you were talking about the story, I said, wait a minute, chess.com, right? And I looked it up, and yep, he was publishing. He said that he was involved in the publishing. But Tyler, I am a bit confused. Like, so if Magnus sold his company to chess.com, does that mean he had access to, he wouldn't have access because all those assets have been taken from? I don't know how that works. And is there in that report or that investigation, does that come up at all? Does Eric or Wall Street Journal note that he might have had, like, how could he have had this confidence to cheat? Did he have this data from chess.com after selling his company?
They're not, it's not being reported. I'm speed reading the article. It's a very long article. Well, somewhat long. And what does it say about Magnus? Magnus is only mentioned 5 times, once in the title. And it mentions how he's in the process of selling his company. In a private conversation after the game, the report says Carlsen said it was unlikely any game he's ever played. Carlsen said that when he played prodigies in the past, they exerted themselves with great effort. Neiman, on the other hand, appeared to play effortlessly. And the app that he's selling is called the Play Magnus app, which he's selling for $83 million. Chess.com.
Is that so unusual that in a sale of a company, I'd be like, yeah, I actually want access to your database specifically. Here's the people. Is that crazy?
Say that again?
So if I was selling my company to your company and I said, hey, but I want access to some users in your database, here's the list of those users. What do you say? Is
You
that crazy or?
don't even have to do that. You could just say, who's the biggest, cheaters in your system? And you might say, funny you should ask. We just did crunch some data, and it turns out that this guy, who's well known, we've had to take him off the platform for a time, or he's been caught in more than 100
So it'd
different.
be like volunteered sharing. That's interesting.
Another question I had is: are these chess games online for money, or is it only the physical games you play that are for money?
The
Like
article,
that's
the
the other
article,
bit. What are the consequences of this?
the article just said that some of them were for money. So the next shoe to drop will be, how did Magnus? Now that this is out, it kind of proves what I suspected all along, which is that this data did exist, and somehow Magnus got privy to it. But that's the last piece that has yet, that shoe hasn't dropped yet, but it will. But maybe like you're asking, is it even legal that he gets it? How did he get it? it this would perfectly explains why Magnus had the confidence to refuse to play Hans anymore.
Because I feel like
All
this
right.
would be one of those things where, hey, come on over. I'll show you on my computer. We're not going to give you a username. And you're just going to look at my screen. And then you can walk away with whatever confidence you feel you've acquired from momentarily, accidentally looking at my screen.
Right. Well, by the way, here's another thing the article doesn't mention. Because Hans is well known in the chess world, the fact that he's well known in the chess world and chess.com exclusively knows that this dude's a cheating fucking bastard, everybody who works at chess.com would be buzzing about this knowledge. This would be an incredibly hard secret to keep amongst people who work at chess.com. And Magnus, being the Michael Jordan of chess, no doubt has great relationships with some of the people at chess.com, and they would probably feel, like some people want to help, their heroes
Protect the sport.
to protect the sport or whatever, and may have given him the heads up before the story came out.
So, Tyler, sorry, I want to understand this better. When you say cheating, are we saying that when you're playing these online games, someone is opening another browser tab or running some algorithm in the background to compute the
Right.
moves, next
Correct.
move fast enough so that you can, and
Exactly.
so when chess.com is detecting these, cheating events, they're like, oh my god, you just did that move, and that would normally, it's like 1 in a million chance that you'd be able to do that move
Correct.
given the time span you had to play that move, right?
Correct.
Why wouldn't you just wait a while, get the move from the chess computer, and wait a few minutes?
Well, it's a
Well,
timed game, right? These are timed games, so you can't. But I guess that's how it's kind of interesting. Like it's a timed game, I'm guessing, but I guess they can figure out if you're cheating. So that's the bit that I'm still scratching my head about. Really, is how these cheatable events, like how are they really figuring them out, and then how do they? I guess they can also see from patterns that you have of past play because they have all your moves recorded, right?
Well, depending on which community you're on, like I know myself, like on Valve, for example, in a game like Counter-Strike, if you've been a player for a certain while, you become part of this system called Overwatch. So you become like one of the first people who referees some of these instances. And so you can either flag them or say, yes, I agree that cheating has occurred here. So there's that subjective level, but also there's the detection level. So you might be running other software, but you could also be running another computer with computer vision software. I know I've seen this for poker games. People do this in poker as well. But it's the statistics of, hey, you started off playing like this at one point, and then all of a sudden you became like Alpha Zero level good at a game or something. So those kinds of things also raise suspicion. And eventually, I think people just make mistakes with software and they get lazy. And we find that, oh, look, we found the shell, we found the hook. You've been detected.
check this out. So I want to read the last bit of this article. It's kind of interesting. It says the report also addresses the relationship during the saga between Carlson and Chess.com, which is buying Carlson's Play Magnus app for $83 million. The report says that while Carlson's actions at the competition where he lost prompted Chess.com to reassess Hans Niemann's behavior, meaning like dig into the data.
The analytics, the patterns of his plays, yeah.
Right. Now, Carlson, according to the report, Magnus Carlsen, the super champ, didn't talk with, ask for, or directly influence chess.com's decisions at all. So, however, that doesn't mean somebody didn't send him an email as a heads up. He didn't ask for, he wasn't directly involved in chess.com's decisions. He said nothing. Magnus, their intent, they're very careful in doing this to reveal, they want you to know that Magnus Carlsen did not do anything inappropriate and didn't ask us for anything. As I was wondering, surmising, how did he get this? He obviously had access to this knowledge somehow. How did he get it? Did he ask them for it?
Deus ex machina, divine
They,
intervention.
they are preemptively meeting that suggestion by letting you know Magnus didn't ask us for anything. We want to be clear. Okay, well, there's other ways for him to get access to this without asking for it, which is what I said earlier, which is you have people who work there who are huge fans of Magnus who might have leaked it to him without him even knowing it exists or asking for it. And
so, question I had, sorry, other theory / question, Tyler. So, the fact that Magnus owned one of these platforms or sold it to chess.com, wouldn't he have data? Obviously, he hands over the site and all the user activity, etc. But he still could have a copy of all his activity, and maybe there's a strong overlap between chess.com players' activity and his site. So he could just be using that data to his advantage as a weapon when he's and then of course chess.com have that data as well because they bought his company, and so they can be like, aha, we know you're cheating because you used to own your site, and now we know you're using that data that you used to own, still have copy of, to cheat. Isn't that a feasible theory as to how he got caught cheating?
yes, there's one last sentence here worth revealing. It says that chess.com previously noted that chess.com had never shared a list of cheaters or chess.com's cheat detection algorithm with Carlsen. Okay, fine. You didn't reveal a list of cheaters or the cheat detection algorithm. Again, somebody could have just very simply, subtly direct messaged him on any app of your choice and said, hey, heads up, Magnus, I'm a huge fan. Hans cheats like a fucking crazy man. And now, had that happened, what I'm suggesting, that doesn't violate what they're now claiming publicly.
So isn't it likely that he didn't really know for sure, but there were just rumors flying around, and in that moment, the intuition became strong enough in his mind that, okay, those rumors are true, and so I'm going to opt out.
I think you're right. And he says that he noticed that Hans was using a type of play that humans don't normally do and computers normally do, and was doing it. And he says people who are able to do that, there are a few people who are able to play at this kind of bizarre prodigy level. And he says people, when they normally play at prodigies that I've played in the past, usually are exerting themselves with great effort to do this very incredibly complex, thought process. He says Neiman, on the other hand, unlike any other game I've ever played, appeared to be playing effortlessly, which makes no sense. You can't be doing genius level mental gymnastics effortlessly. It just doesn't make sense. So it's similarly with if we use the video game analogy, video game engines can detect how you normally play and can detect anomalies if you're using a bot to help your gameplay. Other players know you are too. Oh, you don't normally hit a headshot. If you do it once, okay, that's lucky. But if you start doing
through the wall, through the door, through the window, while I'm crouching, and you didn't even see me go in there, bullshit.
Right. This happens on a daily basis for gamers who play war recreation type games, like Call of Duty, where somebody has a bot to assist them and they're able to play at a genius level or at a prodigy like level, And if you're playing at a prodigy level, you usually have to use tremendous focus. And if you're playing at a prodigy level and also playing effortlessly, that's an obvious sign that you're using assistance of some kind, and that's what Magnus is said when asked about that game that and why he's refusing to play, and that makes perfect sense. But I
Yeah, there's a
still
physiological factor there. Like the calories you burn while you're focused is huge. So, like in chess championships, the people actually have to have quite a lot of supplemental calories because the focus does take up so much energy. So it's quite literally a physical measure.
now what's interesting is this data report shows that the guy is a habitual cheater. So it adds a lot of credence to the idea that he was cheating when he was playing against Magnus. How we still don't have the exact specifics, but the options are very limited. It's either a Bluetooth cock ring or an anal supplement, which, by the way, it technically as a geek is actually trivial. You could have somebody within Bluetooth range feeding you answers because the way chess works is it's incredibly short um, signals that you would send. You would just say, you know, A4 to B3. This is an incredibly simple thing that you could convert into even um, Morse code, for example.
It'd just be a
So
series of vibrations, right, in your aforementioned.
incredibly simple
In
vibration.
your
Right. This is technically incredibly doable to cheat at this high level. And I would suggest that somebody who's a habitual cheater playing, the best, one of the best players of all time in a major event with prize money on the line is likely to, it's not out of the realm of possibility or reason to, especially given how he played effortlessly at a prodigy level, as Magnus is asserting and whatnot. So anyway,
Tyler, how about the point about chess.com trying to manage cheaters on its platform, because this is squarely, getting on the front line of on a story like this, and you're making money off of the players. If your platform becomes an untrustworthy platform for competition, I mean, I suspect that there's a whole other explanation of them just kind of forthright. They monitor cheaters, yes, but this was a time for them to kind of step out and step up and say, hey, yes, we're aware of this cheater, and we're also aware of other cheaters, so beware.
So I also had another kind of comment. I mean, does this have broader implications for? I mean, would you consider this an esports? And I'm curious how the top esports platforms games handle this, because yeah, as you were saying, like if your game gets known for having a lot of cheaters on it, it can discredit the game. People may not want to play it and move on to the next competing game. So I'm curious if this is considered an esport, and whether we're going to start seeing, like, even in potentially live esports games, people analyzing the games and being like, oh, there's a likely high chance, almost like how cameras have changed, sort of normal sports with lines and faults in tennis, all that. Do we start seeing a shift in how these games are played, and like automatic detection of cheaters live when they're happening? I'm curious about that.
I don't know.
One thing that's interesting to me in the meta is that how we had to get into all this cheating drama for chess to still stay interesting and relevant now that machines beat humans so many years ago. So it's interesting that it's a whole meta game now rather than being worried about the actual individual moves.
scandal rocks the chess world. Dum dum, breaking news. No, I think it's a great story because it shows how these databases of, hey, look, we're all just playing games, competing with one another, that privacy is still an issue, that people have certain privileges, that reputations give you access. It's very intriguing, makes for a great story.
Okay. Yeah, there is a tech angle in there in the cheating detection bit and all that, which we might be if it turns out that Mabana's able to inquire to figure out maybe there's additional context that we could appreciate that the average journalist isn't even bothering to ask. That would be really interesting. Um, anyway, so any additional, if Mabwana, if you end up having, if that chat develops within your WeChat group with your I imagine it's your Stanford class, that if he ends up saying more about it, please do inform us any kind of additional details that develop there. So, next up, Tesla plans to remove ultrasonic sensors from some new Model 3s and Ys cars this month and Model S and X cars in 2023 in favor of camera and software assistance. Tesla's removing ultrasonic sensors in their ongoing plans to use cameras. Intel chip reviews, who cares? Associated Press says a U.S. judge sentences Capital One hacker Paige Thompson, who accessed data on over 100 million people, to 5 years of probation. The Department of Justice says it is very disappointed, I guess, with this judge. Yeah, because normally something of that scale, they would be doing time. A former Seattle tech worker convicted of several charges related to a massive hack of Capital One Bank is getting a 5-year probation. Wow. Yeah, I'm not surprised the DOJ is disappointed. Next, a report by Senator Elizabeth Warren's office. Fraud and scams are occurring more often on P2P payments app Zelle, with banks only reimbursing 47% of the defrauded customers. Oh boy. Incidents of fraud and scams are occurring more often on the popular peer-to-peer payments service Zelle. Spotify buys Kinzen, which helps identify misinformation and hate speech. The Dublin-based company partnered with Spotify in 2020, initially on election content. Audio streaming service Spotify on Wednesday said it had acquired Kinzen, a firm that had helped it identify harmful content on the platform.
Tyler, just going back to Zelle for 1 second. I remember towards the beginning of COVID, I used Zelle like once, and I had an issue with it, and I tried to get some customer service help, and it was completely, bizarrely non-existent. Like it was freakingly like there was no way to get any help at all. This was back literally 2 years ago, So I'm wondering if they've resolved that kind of part of the issue. Hearing it, you said 47%, or I'm sorry, what that statistic was mind-boggling because Zell's trying to assert itself as a new emerging way to do point-to-point, transactions, right?
The
So
statistic is that the banks who use Zelle have only reimbursed 47% of the customers that were defrauded, which they should be refunding 100% of them. So,
in the past, when I used to work for JP Morgan, there's like inside baseball knowledge on when you are presented with a choice, do you want to have cash back or not? That's basically, are you going to use the Pulse Pay system, the ATM system, or are you going to use the credit card system? And if you do get cash back, you're not covered in the way you are by your credit card terms because the payment processor, Visa or MasterCard, whoever your bank uses, has a completely different set of lines. So I think Zelle is this uncharted waters where the banks may not have the same liability, ergo, they don't care as much. They're not actually having to pay out as much, and it's an internal system on whether they choose to want to pay out that claim. So this is banking stuff.
Hey, this is Rob. I used it twice, and the first time I used it, actually I used it once. The first time I used it, I missed an area code just by a little bit, and sent let's just say a nice size amount of money to another place. And so I said, hey, you know what? Do you have the ability to stop that? And I'll tell you, my bank was pretty fast. They'll say, well, look at it. I got documents that they reached out to them, everything like that. That was not fraud. That was just my stupidity. So, but my thing is, It'd be interesting to see how they're defining fraud because some people could, just as I made a stupid mistake out of an area code, um, some people may have made mistakes and they're calling it fraud. That would be interesting to know. Now, what I don't know is, was there really someone like that area code mistake? Was there really somebody at the other end of that? That's what I never really got confirmed, right? So did I end up wiring something to a number that probably didn't exist or did not? They could not confirm. All they came back to me was, hey, whoever it is, they're not giving it back. I just wanted to know, was like, is there really somebody on that other side that I like fucked this up on? Or are you sitting on it? And that's the thing that I was concerned about. But that was a fraud. That's my own stupidity.
Well, Robert, that's a middle-aged brain fart, and that's not just stupid. That wasn't your stupidity at all. That was poor app design. To do lots of transactions, they say, "Are you sure?" and then press again. Right? It was
Curious.
Amazon that popularized the one-click. That it probably is a little more error prone. But my point is that's certainly not you. That's poor app design. If the user experience was designed better, they would dramatically draw that down. That whoever spoke before, I'm sorry, I didn't catch who spoke before, but that is a regulation hole. If you're talking about the two different paths, and credit cards obviously have a lot better rules and how you have to use their service, and banks have a little loosey goosey path that really and then who gets screwed over? The consumers. That's what we call a hole in regulation that is part of the
David.
problem with financial services. There's these
David,
little holes here
it's
and there.
your other namesake, David, that was speaking, and I was just referencing it's the difference between the ACH system, it's an automatic clearinghouse where checks and all that, the routing number and all that stuff's verified. That's what your debit card is, ACH. When you get your direct deposit, that's the ACH system. But Swift is the thing that the Russia got locked out of. That's the wire transfer. That's why it costs a whole lot more. And you usually used to have to go into the bank and talk to the bank manager, and he was the one approving it because they were actually taking on that liability. It's just the different payment layers. So I'm not an expert on this, but I am pretty sure that they're not using the Swift system because you're not actually doing a wire transfer. Robert, you may have had that experience because it was such a high. Maybe you're a private bank member or you have high balances that they want to keep that customer relationship so well. Obviously, if we're talking about Elizabeth Warren's report, she's coming at it from consumer protection angle, where someone may have just mistakenly sent an extra $80, but that $80 prevented them from paying rent, and now their recourse is to get into the class action realm of things. And yeah,
I would agree.
they've been.
The only thing I would have asked that probably Zelle would do with their app is, and to help silly people like myself, which I'll never use their app again, but or their process again, is when you're plugging in a number that it sends to the person that you're expecting to send it to, something goes to them, the person you're sending it to confirms that the number's right before the transaction actually occurs. Because honestly, most of the people you're sending it to, you're texting each other anyway. And that would have saved me from making my mistake. So
Yeah, that's kind of how Interact transfers work in Canada. Like you can do an e-transfer and you send a password along with the payment. And so nobody can access the payment unless they have the correct password. So it's an interesting safety that you can add.
Okay. So the next big topic is a CISA report finds multiple government hacking groups, meaning Russia and China, kept long-term access to a U.S. military contractors network. Um, that's all you need to know. So that's unfortunate. U.S. cybersecurity law enforcement and intelligence officials revealed on Tuesday that sophisticated hackers infiltrated a long-term access to a U.S. military contractors network.
that's really, that's a pretty decent sized compromise right there.
It depends which contractor it is. if it's one of the big ones, that's very concerning that they would have access. And the question is, how how vulnerable, how much access did they have, and what is this contractor providing? Let's pray to God it's not really high end technology.
Yeah, let's hope it's only butter.
So next up, Celsius co-founder and chief strategy officer resigns a week after the CEO. Global tax director at the company will assume the CSO role. Okay, next, an interview with Unity CEO on its game engine future, merging with Iron Source, monetization versus creation, falling stock price, and more. So that's just an interview. New York Times reporting that LA County arrests election software maker Connect. It's, I guess, pronounced Connect, but it's spelled Konnech. Connect. So LA County arrests the CEO of election software maker Connect, and he happens to be Chinese, over alleged theft of data on poll workers, and says some data was found stored in China. Oh, Jesus. Eugene Yu and his firm have been the focus of attention among election deniers. He's now been arrested over the alleged theft of data on poll workers, and says some data was found stored in China. This is New York Times.
Yeah, this is definitely going to play into the stop the steal um,
Well, here's
thing that's going on out there.
here's the weird thing is you would expect something like this from the right publications, not the New York Times. The top executive at an elections technology company has been the focus of attention among election deniers, was arrested by LA County officials in connection with an investigation into possible theft of personal information about poll workers. Eugene Yu was taken into custody on suspicion of theft, according to LA County District Attorney. Connect, which is based in Michigan, develops software to manage election logistics, and LA County is among its customers. The company has been accused by groups challenging the validity of the 2020 presidential election with strong information about poll workers on servers in China. The company has repeatedly denied keeping data outside the US, including in recent statements to the New York Times. The district attorney's office said its investigators had found data stored in China. Oh, shit. Holding the data there would violate Connect's contracts with the county, or its customer at the LA County. Why is he doing that?
So hopefully the investigation will kind of, deliver any kind of insights on if there was any kind of effect on the election, which everybody who's tried to press charge, or take that to court kind of was unable to. But that would help, kind of resolve it as a potential another red herring. But that there needs to be a federal law against any company that does that as well, storing data outside of the U.S. I mean that should become a federal crime. So hopefully the voting, legislation, federal voting legislation will kind of, maybe it already includes it, but it definitely should.
So, David, there's actually laws on it that you're not supposed to have overseas workers or data stored offshore. But
Well, data should not. Why should you store federal election data offshore? It's not like we don't have data servers here. Uh, Getting workers would be a different issue. I would think, but the data itself, it must stay. I mean, I don't know. I'm not running IT for the elections, but it doesn't make any sense to me. Even if you're trying to save a few bucks or whatever,
But
we
keep in
have.
mind, we have a very decentralized voting network out there. It's not like it's run by the federal government. You got all these different counties and cities running it, you know. And the good news, bad news about this thing, especially with the stop the steal conspiracy people, nobody's contesting LA elections. You know what I mean? But the challenge is, it's just going to fuel those guys even more so.
I think, I'm sure. I mean, sure, we're absolutely very distributed in terms of how our municipal election offices run and where the data could be and all that. But given given what's going on with regards to the Secretary of State and lots of the literally the presidential election is determined at the state level, there should be a federal law that's speaks to specifically how you have to handle data. So I would be a huge advocate for keep that data stateside, just to kind of check that box.
Yeah, that
No,
does.
I wouldn't be surprised if more states will start doing this. I think you bring up a good point. I think a number of them probably will. They probably never thought about this stuff, and they're probably independently starting to do it. But no, I get it.
Don't worry, they'll store it in the cloud.
Next is from Axios, a look at crypto Twitter, which acts as a town hall where traders, investors, scammers, content creators, founders, and others connect, do business, and relax. Okay. Engadget as the next one, Meta details updates to the Facebook feed to let users increase or decrease posts from friends, groups, and pages, helping improve Meta's AI-based ranking. That's good. Yeah, I want to see more or less from this source. Why not? Uber's SVP of Mobility says chronic driver shortages are now over, letting the company focus on improving cancellations and wait times. So that's good. A related story, perhaps, is I had it saved in a tab here for later with the tweets, but it was one that I found today myself that I will pin now to the top of the room. There it is. This is from San Francisco. 1,000. The airport in San Francisco is called SFO. Like the one in Los Angeles is called LAX. So you get the idea.
Was just there last night. Red eye.
So 1,000 SFO restaurant workers go on strike, which I'm told is all of them. So the SFO workers had a strike, and they're standing outside the airport striking, as if people are going to refuse to cross that picket line. I'm pretty sure people are going to go to their flights. Anyway, it turns out that there was one business that was still open for business, which was the Cafe X robotic coffee machine, which was, the robotic barista, which was not striking. And you have to appreciate the perfect encapsulation of a foreshadowing of the future in this scenario that I'm painting here, with the humans outside protesting while the robot is inside, not joining the protest.
And that robot is in a very convenient, high traffic area at SFO.
Well, the funny part is they've already started replacing a lot of their jobs, like the waiters and waitresses, with automation. So what makes you think they're not going to focus on changing the rest of it, right? Even the drinks. You go to Vegas, they're freaking robots that do your drinks in Vegas. The drinks are perfect. The con is you don't have that human interaction. You don't have the freebies or buybacks or anything like that.
Heck, take
I
the Newark airport, which it's not totally taking out everybody, but at the airport, you actually just punch in what you want, and the person just shows up. They don't take your order. You know what I mean? So they're taking components of needing so many workers out of it. So Newark has to be one of the most efficient in the U.S. that I've dealt with in a long time.
Have you tried to eat out of Newark? I mean, half the time your order's wrong. You're waiting forever for it, and
Yeah,
then it's
but you still punched it in on the computer yourself. You know what I mean? Because having worked food and bev, some of the issues that people have too is they may not be clear on how they order, or the person may not hear right. But at least if I punched it in on a computer, I want my fries extra crispy. I get it. Granted, yeah, you get the robot on the back end. Eventually, you start cooking it. That'll be good. But Newark's made a step in the right direction.
So it says that they're making $17 an hour, and the quote is, "Wages for us are really, really low. It's not enough for me to support my family."
So we're talking San Francisco and $34,000 a year working full time. I mean, even if you're getting tips and you double that, it's so far below what you need to support your family. Even if you're living, a couple families in a house type of thing to pay. I mean, that's a solidly rock solid true statement. It's just not enough money.
Right. But should let me ask you this, David: if you found yourself in that situation, would you attempt to go to upskill yourself in some kind of way? By the way, the lady who made this quote says her name's Lucinda, and she's been working at SFO for 20 years, and says she has never received a raise. Now,
So upskilling. So as I recall, during the big globalization thing that started back in the '90s, I recall that the kind of after analysis after analysis after paralysis, that all of that retraining stuff is it's a what's the right word to say? It's a great vision, but it's not how things unfold. And I would just offer the following scenario. I think it's a great thing to offer to people like that, but it's challenging when you're working where do you find the time? I guess is the point. You're working a couple jobs, I'm sure,
oh,
right?
oh
And
yeah,
your kids are struggling, and it's very stressful.
My nephew
And
just started.
yeah. She's in San Francisco. I mean, she's in the Bay Area. No doubt there are programs that will pay her to learn to code, and at the end of that program, there is a practical desperation on behalf of Silicon Valley firms to hire female engineers.
But even if you don't upscale, you can move. I mean, when state of New York got too expensive for our family, guess what we did? My folks moved to the Midwest. Ooh, and that made all the difference. We went from New York to Missouri, and that was a major change. So people have the ability to reload to a different market and give it a whirl there too.
my father did that, and so I totally feel that as one avenue and a solution. When you have And let's not even make this. I won't even make it an immigrant thing. I'll talk about just generally any American can move. It does sometimes get tougher though, right? When you barely have enough money to pay for rent, it costs quite a bit more to move. So yes, it is, and that's actually a smart solution. But it's really a challenging path. I'd love to actually read a little bit more about a study that would really explain some of these different options about this specific problem.
Tyler, oddly enough, my nephew, my sister's family lives in the Bay Area, and he just about a year ago started a company for the next generation, the upcoming generation. It's called Bay Area Robotics, and I think you just opened up a new addressable market, and those that are feeling like they're getting pinched out of the labor force. So look at the generations that need work that are starting to sunset their careers. Go after the young and the old. So it's a great catch.
The issue
Uh,
is that you got support systems. When you talk about the lady didn't get a raise for 20 years and she's still working there, if you're a single mother and it's not only the double and triple jobs that they could be working, but who's take care of the kids? Who's going to be there in case there's an emergency or something like that? So the support system and the funds to actually move or the fear factor. You get settled in a certain thing. So there's a lot of different complicated aspects you have to look at, not just the opportunity. And sometimes people don't even know about the opportunities because they're so focused on going from one aspect to another, one emergency, taking care of the kids, and who can do this, who can do that, and have that mindset to actually think of something outside that arena. So I just want to put that out there.
I'll, I mean, my heart breaks reading her story. She's working two different jobs at the airport, and it says on days when she has double shifts, she gets home at 11 p.m. and her next shift starts at 3:30 a.m. and that just, I mean, she ain't that isn't laziness. You call her whatever you want, but lazy isn't one of them. Um, and you know what comes to my mind is that so much of why people go to expensive schools, one of the real benefits, and obviously and above and beyond the education factor, is the networking factor, for sure, right? We all agree on that more than ever. Now that it's not that Harvard has some secret monopoly on information, right? In fact, they give it away for free online, and people are willing, to cut off their limbs to attend Harvard, and in large part for the networking, right? And rightfully so. I would even say it's probably still worth it if you were accepted there, just on for the networking aspect. Forget the education bit, and yet even the networking bit is technically free. And what I mean is, the lady in this article, God bless her, is interfacing with uh, high net worth individuals on a probably hourly basis at this airport of SFO, who, even if she didn't upskill in this technical sense of learning how to code in Python, somebody who was really gifted at the art of networking could probably, you know, so much of what eventually leads to people's success is these happenstances of luck, of meeting people who, due to meeting somebody, led to future opportunities.
Hey, Tyler,
Yeah, hold on.
some of us are even regulars, so
Yeah,
you're spot on about that.
right. But to put a cherry on that point is to be in that same role at SFO for 20 years. I imagine I would love. I wish. I hope that she met people that potentially could have brought her into other fantastic opportunities, etc., etc. I would love to think that what I do in these situations, I imagine myself in the same scenario and imagine what would I do, what could I do, and I often have this mental exercise of what happens if I'm reincarnated, in Southeast Asia, with a handicap or with no access to good education, which I'm surrounded by the way. I'm surrounded by people with very subpar education, who, by the way, are happier on average than people with great educations. Or anyway, that's a whole other conversation. But you know, I clearly reflect on. Uh, I was given an incredible amount of fortunate fortune in my access to education and everything else, but I play this mental game of like, gosh, what could you do? What can you do if you don't have education? Does it come down to your gift of gab and your ability to befriend people and network and whatever? Because I see some people doing it here in Thailand that are not educated in any normal sense, but are really good at networking, and they end up making opportunities for themselves. And I I wonder if why that isn't more of a formalized um, train of thought. That why don't why anyway. I guess the Dale Carnegie How to Influence People book is,
Tyler, real quick, you
yeah,
have the issue of you mentioned that she goes to bed or she gets off work at 11:30 and gets starts her next job at 3:30 in the morning. That's sleep deprived of that
for
4 hours
for sure.
is not enough to keep your mental and your thought process to be expansion to really
Amen.
hone in. Your protein levels and everything go out the window. I actually went on a sleep diet because I live that 3 to 4 hour because of the work that I do and the love that I do of it. It's my choice. and I had to reset because it just doesn't work that way. So the idea is that you talk about the networking is fabulous, and you're right, the opportunity being, glorious and happy and going out there. Agree with all that. But the idea is that if she's been doing this for 20 years, her ability to expand and get out of that just because of lack of sleep, that's a whole nother story.
Yeah.
I think so. Tyler, that's a really great point you're bringing up, and for those that are able to get inspired and have success on that, there's something there. But I think the big issue is just that things have changed over the last few decades, right? I mean, what a great story that it's in frickin' the Bay Area in SFO. I got there in the mid '80s, and talk about change. I mean, holy cow! So the affordability of the housing, the access, the cost of education. There are things that comprised the American ladder, American dream. Buying a house, going to school, or going to college. Those things they're out of reach for younger people. And for I'll just say overworked people, using her as an example, when you're forced to work more than one job. So I mean, I think that's really focusing on the really direct problem is something that we need to do more of.
Okay.
The problem I have with people only focusing on the wages too is, and I saw it when I was younger, it's just like, yeah, you can have the wages go up, but they're still not addressing the hours, you know? So it has to be a balance of how many hours I work and what my wages are. And the tough thing it's really hard for part-time people who are working multiple jobs part-time, just on the body. And I did it to pay school because you have so many hours at this location, then you have a 3 hour pause, so you really don't get the weight, and then you start another job. And some people don't even have that, or it's just total sleep disruption. But what I struggle with these minimum wage things is if you don't address the hours, I could take your wage up and I could reduce your hours. So it has to be a balance if they want to do it.
Well, that's where the unions are getting revitalized because exactly that. When you're talking about hours kind of going, way past 40 or what have you, then you are talking about your people's mental health and things like that. But that's why there's been I'll say, resurgence in just at least considering unionizing your shop, as it were, and things like that, because it's, if unions, I know Ken's going to speak up if he's here in a minute, because he and I love to go back and forth on this. Both of our fathers were members of the same union. And so, some unions can get mismanaged, okay? That's a truism. But the principle of what they tried to do and what they did in the 20th century is, you can't argue with how it helped build the middle class, right? So I mean, rather than throwing out the idea of the value of a union, just how do we cultivate a unions that help revitalize a middle class in today's deglobalizing environment.
Well, we also have to look at some of the laws too, because the 32 wasn't that big of a deal until Congress started passing all these requirements of if you work over 32 hours, you have to have health care and all that other stuff. So what companies started doing and scheduling started happening for those of us who worked hourly at those times, then all of a sudden you were not getting over the 32. And so then you ended up having to pick up another part-time job. So you got the balance of companies that used to give the hours but didn't pay the health care to now, yeah, you get the health care if you go over 32, but they're not going to get too many people who go over 32. So there's a strategic view that needs to be really discussed and debated.
Well,
Well,
look at
healthcare. Sorry, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
look at the bottom thing here. You have the mother raising the children a lot of the times by themselves. So she has to drive or take a bus or something. Probably doesn't have a car, obviously. Take some kind of transportation support system to get to the airport. And then what happens if one of her kids gets sick or has to go wait in line all day to go get some kind of medicine or do something for those children? And if you have more than one, then that impacts your workload. And so who suffers? It's not only her, but then it suffers for the children, and then it suffers the whole ecosystem. So she can never be sick if you think about it. So the whole idea is it gets really bad. Sorry about that.
But when should society have to own other people's choices about the lifestyle that they chose? I get the work thing, but do we own everybody? I mean, I totally follow that story, but should everything be a full wraparound when other people make their decisions to have children or get married or get divorced and this and the other? So does the tribe own taking care of everybody?
So choices. So that just remember that choices. That's a great way to think about it. However, it's an incomplete way to think about it. Your choices that you are afforded are also within the context of your environment, the context of who's raising you, their economic situation, and so there we need to recognize that there's choices and then there's a larger environment, and when the larger environment within which you make those choices is is imbalanced. I don't know what other word to use between different environments, right? That we grow up in or what have you. That we should look at a way to reconcile that, because the social costs for people who who make bad choices, or those who strive to make the right choices but still have a really serious uphill struggle because of the environment they're in. I just think that we need to always take a step back before we think that, I made my choices. Look at me. I'm 30, 40 years old and I'm worth all this and blah, 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 blah. And because I made the right choices. That's horse shit. The choices of your parents when you were a toddler, the choices of your teachers when you're going to school, regardless of private, public, the choices of your friends to bully or not. Your life is not determined solely by your choices, full stop. But we get this mentality, that sometimes that's the case. Sorry, Tyler.
Yeah,
Hi,
can I?
Tyler.
Yeah, can I?
Tyler, this
Can
is
I add
Irvin.
in?
I'd just like
Go,
to add.
go ahead, Irvin.
Okay, uh, great exchange between Robert and David. I'm sitting here listening to this and going, how old is this conversation that you guys are having? It's not just about this. This has been going on for many decades in our country. I often wonder. Right now, the livable wage, I'm not talking about the minimum wage, the livable wage in Northern California is about $28 an hour. And here's the rub, is that there are employers, I'm sorry, that can afford to pay that, but they will not, because they are more interested in putting more money in their own pockets than the people that work for them. So we're at a dilemma, and this has been the way that our country has been structured. We always had a working group of people, and then we had those that are running the businesses. So I hear you guys going around. It looks like a vicious circle, and nobody's really talking about what the reality is that employers are not going to pay a livable wage if they can put more money, because number one, they got stock. Those that are publicly owned have stock, uh, people that own their stock that they've got to report to. They've got to make sure that instead of looking long term, they're looking at every quarter and trying to make sure that they're efficient. And so they aren't going to be doing those things. I'm a Bay Area. I'm from Palo Alto. It's my home. I love it. And all of my relatives, brothers and sisters, lived in the Bay Area, and most of them have moved out of Palo Alto because they can't afford to be there anymore. They commute back in, or they found jobs in outlying areas, Modesto and other parts of Central California and the Bay Area. But it's about, and Robert brings up, who's going to be responsible for these choices, and we all make choices. Everyone, including the people that own these businesses. Who's responsible for? I don't think the federal government is responsible for everybody. But then again, when we don't take our social issues and be responsible, who is going to stand in the gap? And we
I'll
do
help
have a
answer.
gap.
Yeah,
I'll help answer
if I
that.
could, if I could weigh in. Yeah, this is John. Just a couple of quick things. So there's a series of exposés being written about McKinsey right now and their role in the widening income gap between executives and workers, and how systematically they've encouraged and supported that gap. Um, there's the robotic solution where if these restaurant workers can't afford to live on the salary they were being paid, that increasingly robotic restaurants are going to solve the problem for travelers, restaurants, restaurateurs, and airports. But it's only going to amplify that income disparity by eliminating jobs for people who are barely scraping by. And so, if you look at um, the future of democracy and the peaceful transition of power, and you look at how many people, sort of hillbilly elegy kind of space, if you look at how many people are working two jobs, getting 3 or 4 hours of sleep a night, and driving into work past opulent houses, cars, and lifestyles, um, it's not exactly a good formula for rational discussion, for finding the center from the polarization we're currently in. And I don't know what the solution is, but I think if you look at how the average CEO makes hundreds of times what the entry level worker is making in their company at scale, and how many people's jobs can and will be eliminated by AI and robotics. The sort of natural forces at play are only amplifying the income inequality and the class structure that we've been experiencing, and leads to more and more polarization and a less civil dialogue. And so I think we're seeing that the the influence of the McKinseys of the world on unequal income distribution, and the advance of robotics and AI and disintermediating jobs at a pace faster than it's creating. Ultimately, AI and robotics will create many more jobs, but there's this window that we have right now where the displacement of jobs is faster than the creation of jobs at a time when we're already extremely polarized. And this is really not a good formula. And so I think upskilling restaurant workers into jobs that conform better to Silicon Valley might work for some, but as has been pointed out, when you're getting 3 hours of sleep a night, you can't really learn a new field. You can't afford to move, and we're in the proverbial horns of a dilemma over how we maintain a civil society and democracy in a polarized environment where income inequality is getting greater.
So, John, you brought up some excellent points. I would like to, there's a story out there in 30 seconds or less that resonates exactly like this. So, in Disneyland here in Orange County, there's a lady who worked there for 20 years. The last 8 years before she passed away due to carbon monoxide poisoning, she lived in her car. She never told anyone because the fear factor that she felt, that she wouldn't come let anyone know that she couldn't make ends meet, still working the same job, the same place, that things happened and she could no longer afford to pay rent. So the idea is how many people are living, and just Googled it, 20,000 people are living in out of the car in LA County. In Madrid County and Northern California, I remember going to my former employee's husband's graduation, and they had one of the designers there had said that one of the plaques had like 376% uptick in the amount of people that were living out of the cars, and so they had designed an entire car and how to retrofit it to where you could live out of your car full time. And we're talking a sedan. We're not talking a van. And the idea is that the fear factor of going and talking to your employer and saying, I no longer can make ends meet. What can I do to help get extra pay? What can I do to help, facilitate to make an advance like you talked about? But the retaliation is, oh, well, they're a problem. Out your door you go. So the idea is that you have to have a safe space that we actually engage with our employees because of the issues that we're seeing some improvement in some areas, but not enough, and not for the working class that really needs and helps, especially when you talk about, and obviously I'm in the female side of the gender equality, but that impact of saying those poor single mothers, what we can do to help, maybe have a place to have daycare there, have a place that has, we can have shared rides, all those kind of things. I know a lot of people have done that over the years, and the smaller business have been very successful with it, but we need to make it where it's a really collaborative effort.
And then you also think of the pandemic, all the essential workers are a lot of the people making these low wages and also getting exposed to COVID more and saving us basically is just very unfair. We need to do something.
Healthcare workers, healthcare workers are not making, especially senior care workers and healthcare office workers, not making enough money.
I want to move on from the conversation, but it might be valuable to add in the Southeast Asian solution to this problem is that many, for example, in Thailand, every resort in Thailand has staff housing for all of the maids and caretakers and laundry staff and kitchen staff. In most cases, you have to provide them housing in addition to a salary. And the housing for them is incredibly minimal. And they have it's a shared kitchen, it's a shared bathroom, and it's a very modest Spartan bedroom. And one of the additional benefits to that is some of them have kids, and the kids can go to school. If the kid is sick, kid stays home because there's generally um, you're now working where you live. You can the kid can watch TV for a few hours, and you can go back at lunch and go back. You can keep tabs on your kid who's homesick from school. In that example, I'm just presenting to you how it's done here. Now, could that model be transferred to the U.S.? I don't know, because there's obviously someone's going to raise the issue of slavery at some point in that dynamic, because for fear that you're going to get trapped and not ever be able to leave. I do know of one instance of
It's
that
like a
happening here.
company town, Tyler.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
but
So,
we have to do something. Aspen is providing worker housing now. A number of expensive places.
But that's a red herring. I mean, red herring in the following sense, Tyler. If you're not paying, if you're not running your business, let's not even talk about just paying your workers, because you have to take a step back as an executive and look at everything, right? If you're not running your business in a way that your employees can have some dignity and have their own friggin' place, there's a red flag right there, right? So then your business is kind of tough, and you might have to make some really big decisions about that, how you're acquiring, how you're doing capital investments and everything. And so it's a pickle. It's tough, but I appreciate that as something to at least consider, because it would take the edge off. If you could get a perk, a big perk like that. But we just got to be creative, because as John had mentioned, our culture is what got us here. So we need to really take a step back and look at how to re-steer the culture in a way that includes not just profit, but people and the planet, right? We're not even talking about the friggin' carbon costs, carbon
okay.
footprints and all that shit. And
So
that's, yeah, okay. That's,
consider this: the baby boomer generation, the post World War II generation, of which my mother and my parents were part of, was the big bulge in the demographic pyramid of nearly every Western country, particularly in the U.S., largest generation we've ever had by population. They're now retiring. When they entered the workforce in the 60s, they lowered the price of labor substantially because there were so many of them. So much so that both partners in a living together both had to work because the cost of labor was lowered so much by the fact there was so many of them that they both had to work, and that's what gave rise to the both partners working to in a family household. So they're now retiring, creating an incredible lack of greatly increasing the price of labor relatively, and it's going to the what worked previously on a biological time scale of a hot second that we grew accustomed to assuming is how the way things should be. Humans have had their own what you're kind of you're making a sort of assumption that every person should have their own house and that it's been this way forever, when in reality, on the human time scale, that started less than 1/10 of a microsecond ago. So should we continue to assume that everyone should always be able to live in their own apartment, which is also only a small fraction of the planet lives that way. A lot of the planet still lives with their parents throughout Asia their entire lives. Even in Japan, you have rather wealthy people who live with their parents their whole lives. So I don't know, that maybe due to the demographic changes that are happening, there's a massive, huge global demographic change afoot with lowering birth rates and lowering um, people marrying and having kids. And due to that, there's going to be an equally significant transformation in the economy and the shift towards having to rethink how the defaults of how people live. So this concept of kind of Eastern cohabitation, vocational cohabitation, which is very common in Asia, might need to come to the West, and the size of the accommodation, which is in Asia, is already shrunk down to a goddamn closet, might also be coming to the West. I imagine it is, and if people resist it, you're going to be met with robots. You're just going to exacerbate the trend towards robots.
Hey, Tyler, I mean, we've gotten really comfortable. There's two things. Over 100 years ago or so, even less than that, we were multi-generational households, whether you were an immigrant family or
Sure.
not an immigrant family. But all of a sudden, like you said, we got comfortable. I want my own. I'm 18. Let me get out. Now,
Right.
granted, I grew up in a multi-generational house. Our mom and grandmother stayed with each of our kids to the end. That's just the way we are. So not everybody's like that. So because as we became wealthier, we had more choices. The issue, like you said, a lot of things changed in the economy where people can't really afford some of the things that we've become a habit to. The last thing is retirement. And I've mentioned this before. The concept of retirement used to only be for the wealthy. If you go back pre-depression, now you got everybody across the world, in essence, talking about having the ability to retire. And is that really logical, or will that really remain logical for all humankind, even in the developed world?
Well, we're going to find out because, like I
Just
said,
yeah.
there's huge social demographic changes underway that are going to, and Cheryl can do a whole room on the strategies Japan's, you know, you know,
Just to add a
focused on.
point, in Singapore, most family, both the parents will have to work. So the government actually give incentive for couples. I mean, for new families to actually buy a house near their parents. They actually subsidize. I mean, give them grants for that, so that there will be a support system. If the young couple need to go and work, and then their children can be taken care of by their grandparents easily. So even like what Robert say, even if they are not staying in a big family together, if they live nearby, I think they can still like have dinner together. The grandparents can take care of the kids, and I think that will also optimize and also save a lot of living costs.
Okay, We got to
I'm
move
doing
on.
some research on the future of the senior housing industry, given all these trends that you're talking about. Anybody that's got any information by way of numbers that can tell me how it's being done in other parts of the world, I would love to know that. And just putting a link in my DMs would be enormously helpful because it's going to change. These retirement communities we have now are emptying out because the people are dying and new people do not want to live that way or can't afford to.
Right. This well, this is the other push towards Asia as well, where there's a bit of a, or it's in the very early stages, but I'm already sensing a boom in Southeast Asian retirement communities, in part because it's far, far cheaper, like a quarter of the cost, and the culture of taking care of elderly folks is a much more, uh, I don't know, embedded in the culture of Asia.
Look at the Philippines. You got a number of former Subic Bay and other people, military people, who have opted to retire in the Philippines. So, and that's been going on for a generation or two. So, you got people with they have their full retirement in the military, and they're saying, let me opt out of living full time in the U.S. and live in a place where my money goes further. So, absolutely, Tyler.
But it's also the people who want to pay for their parents but don't have the time to take care of all their needs, and the nursing and the caretaking part in the US is notably subpar, and you could get a much better care for your relative. By the way, I just had, God bless this guy, I just got to share this story. uh, we just had a guest who's 96 years old who was here for a month with his grandson who is in his early 30s, and he had his wife and his two kids. The son, what an incredible! And they were all here for a month together. Then the grandfather had his own bungalow, and the other family had their own villa, and they were all here together. And they just left, and they were just fantastic people. And we're still talking today. They've been gone for 2 days now, and we're still chatting today. And the grandfather, when we were saying our goodbyes, he left very significant tips, which are not expected here at all, to every single member of our team, in their own hand signed envelopes. And uh, we were, this is the first time that we actually were taking care of somebody. It's the first time we had somebody who uh, we were taking care of them in a different kind of way than a normal guest. And there was a couple times where he left the faucet running overnight, and we have, we make our own water, so we're sensitive to that, and we had to turn off the water to his thing till he woke up in the morning, whatever. But I have to say, it was a really enriching experience, and a really, yeah, it was a really, really, really cool experience. Uh, one of the best guests we ever had, in a very unique experience. Anyway, so moving on with the stories, the New York Times is doing a piece about the Border Patrol in America is prioritizing facial recognition, and it is used now on 85% of the 221,000 daily travelers entering the US, replacing the self-serve kiosks, which I just experienced myself exactly a month ago when I arrived in the US. All the kiosks were turned off. I went to the front of the line. I put my passport down. He said, "Welcome back, Mr. Tyler Crowley. You go ahead." And he never opened my passport. And there was a camera there. And this article talks about that, how now all of the international airports in the US are all now using facial recognition, not kiosks, but cameras. 85% are of all visitors are processed through facial recognition, and passengers on 26% of departing flights are also photographed. So here comes the big government database of everybody coming in and out. And I've got news for you that the US knew they wanted this technology 20 years ago and are supporting the companies that provide it and are encouraging those companies to act privately so that they can sell it to other countries at their ports of entry. And the US has access to that data as well, which they use for those people when they arrive here. So somebody who arrives in Dubai is in the Dubai system. That database is accessible by the US team, and that same face print and identity is then stored on the US side, and etc. And now you see how the state has a real interest in data and technology and everything else.
Yeah,
Now,
Tyler, I could confirm that I think this is definitely happening even for
here's a quote.
non-citizens. Because when I flew to the U.S. and the UK, I was amazed at how little I was asked any questions, and and also I even noted how many times my passport was touched, right, or open to the bio page, or it was incredibly low, like compared to when I come back to Tanzania or Africa, where they're constantly asking me questions, flipping through pages, looking at the history, asking me, like the US and UK now, it feels like they are looking at other things to figure you out before you even realize.
So here's an interesting one, and keep in mind this is the New York Times, who previously were writing kind of pieces against facial recognition. So keep that in mind while I read this. It says, "What's the point of facial recognition? Proponents of the new system say that the program streamlines and fortifies the process of entering the US while also helping identify foreign travelers without visas on the way out. Already, the system has stopped around 1,600 imposters from entering the country through airports and land borders, according to Border Patrol representatives. But some say it's less about totals than what it could prevent." Here's the quote. Quote, "We don't want another 9/11 in this country," said Mr. Russo, who noted that the system frees up officers to focus on asking the important questions that help us keep terrorists and drug smugglers out of the country.
So, Tyler, we've talked about this topic many times, but
Yeah.
what's the gestalt of how accurate the facial recognition technology is right now with regards to recognizing people of color? I remember lots of stories coming out saying it's just not that good yet. So for somebody to make that comment, it's like they're touching on a very big sore point that, as an American, right? But just quite literally, coming across the Canadian border, so the people that were responsible for that were people of color. I just don't know how accurate today's technology is. I'm not saying we shouldn't use it. We should use it, but understand it still throws lots of errors, and it would be a part of the system, but just not we rely on it if
Yeah.
that's
But
So
a
I
useful
think
position.
that one, you just need more data to do machine learning, right? I think the coded bias was brought out few years ago. I think by now they should have probably have really improved the database such that I think it most likely going to be more accurate. I mean, the technology is there, but it depends on what you put in, right? So
I promise you, they're using more than just facial recognition too. All right, so probably they're using. You probably don't even realize
fingerprints.
they're probably using your phone information as well. Okay, because people always have some electronic thing open, whether it be NFC, Bluetooth, whatever it may be. That could be another collection point you don't know of. The other thing is, I can identify people by their walking patterns. Okay, the technology behind these cameras are kind of mind blowing right now.
it says there are, to answer your question, David, the article says there are, of course, legitimate reasons for fails. Face change with age and light, and algorithms mislead, particularly with black and brown faces. At the congressional hearing in July, The director of the Center for Technology Innovation at the Brookings Institute pointed this out, noting that at least 3 black men have been arrested because of faulty facial recognition.
The other thing to think about, Tyler, is also when you have a massive amount of weight loss. That's another scenario because I've seen that fail with me.
Plastic surgery, yeah.
Right? Plastic
You lost
surgery,
weight?
another one.
Oh yeah.
Plastic surgery, Botox injections, all of that.
But Tyler, but for customs, right? Usually, besides the face, they also do biometric, right? Like
Well,
fingerprints.
by the way, I mean, for the time being, they still have humans there with your physical passport. So, I mean,
I,
we're not.
yeah, they
Uh,
still check. Yes.
Anyway, the Taiwan pledges to work closely with the U.S. and other allies to implement very firm export controls to prevent China's military from acquiring advanced chips. By the way, I just read that Poland and the U.S. are agreeing to work together on preparing. Let me read this right. Here it is. President of Poland talking with the United States about sharing nuclear weapons to counter Russia. And Russia is rumored to be reportedly moving nukes to in the direction of the Ukraine. There's been transport rumored to be uh, moving in that direction.
So, Tyler, there's also other things in Poland that nobody else has talked about. The only reason why I know about it is friends with family in Poland and my wife's family in Poland. Yeah, they're preparing so much in case Russia decides to do a nuke. They're telling them where to go get their iodine pills, all of that stuff. Anybody over 60 is excluded from getting them. They're not allowed.
By the way, Renjin, thank you for sharing this one. I imagine he's listening because we're talking about this. Stripe identity, which we heard about many, many months ago, I think before anybody. And now Stripe identity appears to be live. And there's a little video in the link I just um, pinned at the top of the room. The Stripe team just tweeted a little video showing how the Stripe Identity mobile SDK is now available so you can verify your customers within your mobile app. If you have a mobile app that needs to make sure you have identity of your users, you can now do that, Twitter.
Tyler, you know you contributed to that, right? By being on Clubhouse, you gave your voice. Also with Twitter Spaces, because
Yeah.
they had data sharing agreements on voices. Now, knowing that and also being a podcaster, you know the way to bypass it is literally have a recording of somebody's voice and run it through Descript. That's how easy of a hack it is.
Hmm. Well, I'm loving this little video that they show so that any app can now have identified users, which for fintech apps are fundamental, but it's fun to think of the social app use cases. But now Twitter has no excuse to not have verified identities of everybody and remove the bots. So the next, thank you for that one, Renjant. Did we go into the tweets? We're almost to the tweets. GoPuff taps Grubhub to deliver groceries, alcohol, and household items across the U.S., starting in New York City, Los Angeles, Chicago, Boston, Philly, and Austin. Amazon sues Washington State's Department of Labor, claiming an order forcing the company to reduce a warehouse's hazard breaks the 14th Amendment. U.S. prosecutors accuse a man of remotely swiping 713 bitcoins from a hardware wallet seized in a case against his brother. And some guests and hosts say Airbnb permanently banned them after background checks by third-party company Inflection revealed minor offenses or old misdemeanors. Oh, that's interesting. Well, It's up to them. It's their platform. Hmm. Yeah, they don't want bad people on their platform because you're you cause all kinds of headaches. And hosts, uh, boy, as somebody who hosts, you know, thousands of people a year, some of these people should not be on the platform. And it makes the platform look really bad when they have really bad actors on their platform. Um, Matter 1.0 smart home standard and certification program is now active. Matter devices may be sold as soon as this month. So now nearly every piece of consumer hardware should be interoperable with everything else. So your web camera that you buy should work seamlessly with pretty much any other app. Meta plans to shut down its newsletter subscription service Bulletin early next year. I remember it seems like they just launched it, which is their Substack competitor, and they were paying people to write on there. I remember. New York Times reporting that in an email to recruiters, Amazon says it is freezing most corporate hiring in its retail business for the rest of 2022. AWS is not affected. Now, if you're taking notes, that is in this week alone. Meta made the same announcement on Monday, 48 hours ago. You have now Facebook and Amazon freezing all new hiring. Again, these people have access to very high paid economists they need to know how the economy is shifting in the future. These companies need to know that so they can prepare because they're huge. These are some of the world's biggest companies. And them making this change is worth noting now, just like Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk selling their shares in their companies in November before the whole stock market took a massive shit. It was also worth noting. So watch out for what signal this indicates, what kind of indicator this is, leading indicator, as we would say in the trading parlance. What kind of leading indicator is this when the world's biggest companies are publicly announcing that they're hiring freezing? By the way, these were previously the fastest hiring companies on the planet. By the way, Amazon during COVID added doubled its footprint globally in 2 years to what it previously was in 2019. So going from the world's fastest hiring to not hiring at all when you're supposed to be a very fast growing company, uh, and watch out for a lot more of this. This hiring freezing globally thing is worth paying attention to. Amazon's attorney general says Google will pay $85 million to resolve Arizona state's consumer privacy lawsuit that claims it surreptitiously collects users' location data for targeted ads. Yeah, well, Google's going to keep doing that until you put a bullet in their skull. They will very happily pay that $85 million if in the whole hassle you went through. They made $85 million on that data in the time it took you to file that lawsuit. So good luck stopping them with that. Google launches medical imaging suite. Oh, geez, I'm sure they're not going to use that data for anything. A cloud service for healthcare professionals that uses AI to scan medical images for faster and more accurate diagnoses. Nothing to worry about there, folks. Your data's safe.
So much for HIPAA. I mean, that that is, it just exposes how ridiculous the whole concept of data privacy and healthcare is in this day and age. Between, your face being used in airports and your chest being used on Amazon, on Google for imaging, come on, you don't have any privacy. You might as well contribute your data for research.
Meta
What's
debuted.
incredibly,
Go ahead.
sorry, Tyler, what's incredibly interesting about this is I know someone who is getting their PhD for doing this AI scanning the imaging for a certain type of cancer. And to think that that was only, I don't know, maybe 2, 3 years ago that that person first told me about this. It's just incredibly fast how quickly Google and other companies are just climbing aboard. And it wasn't too long ago that he even actually just published this paper. So um, it is moving incredibly fast.
Okay.
Well, just one final comment. I think Google does interface with a lot of researchers, so there is an element of humankind will benefit to this. It just sometimes seems a little off when business interests overlap with medicine, because I think culturally we see that as being a no-no. But I think medicine could benefit from commercialization with respect to having somebody like Google offset some of the costs of research. So traditionally, I think that's just how governments have functioned.
Okay. In one more before we go into the tweets. Meta debuts Instagram ads on the Explore page and tests ads in profile feeds, letting creators earn extra income, as they have to do to compete with YouTube and TikTok. And a shorter ad format for Facebook Reels. Yes, again, they are going to have to offer money to people because they're going to go to TikTok and YouTube for this new format of TikTok style short video scrolling. They're going to jump right out of Instagram because that was fun doing it for the hearts and the likes. It was nice. That was dandy. But there's money to be made, Jack. So we're hopping over to YouTube. And oh, by the way, really interesting data point I pulled out of a podcast yesterday. YouTube is really pushing their version of TikTok, which they call Shorts. If you look at the the data results of all of the top YouTube content creators now, it's very quickly become in terms of number of views, it's all of the shorts makers because the views are very short and brief and some might argue insignificant in building a brand. Now, here's what's interesting in this podcast, which was, by the way, from the manager for Mr. Beast, which is the most successful content creator in the history of content. And I'm including mainstream media content, by the way. So, Mr. Beast's manager made a really interesting point that was not really picked up by the interviewer, which is he was at VidCon this year. And VidCon is the biggest annual gathering of these content creators. And he said this year was really interesting because the TikTokers were there for the first time, essentially. Well, not the first, but in a big way they were there. And he and the hosts slash interviewers all made the shared realization that there were TikTokers who had 500 million followers who couldn't fill a tiny room of fans at all, as if they were nobodies. Now, you could interpret that a few different ways. You could say, oh, well, then TikTok doesn't make it, they're not following you like you do on YouTube, and it's hard to build a community. He concluded that that proves that it's hard to build a community on TikTok, and I think he has a good point in saying that. I have a far more sinister suspicion, which is that these people don't actually have 500 million followers. That TikTok is a grand scheme of inflated numbers to trick your brain into getting the dopamine that it so is desperately searching for. And that it's a whole bunch of cockamamie numbers to trick you into thinking that you're being heard or seen or what have you.
Digital opium.
Yeah,
And
that dollar number definitely inflated because if you compare, because I know some creators, they have both this account on Instagram and TikTok and YouTube as well. The TikTok will always have like if you create a new account, that person can gather like more than 1,000, 100,000 followers within a week. That's almost impossible. So that number must be inflated.
I'm really surprised there hasn't been an investigation into this. It seems sort of obvious. I mean, and maybe
But
it's
Tyler, I have this theory because if you use WeChat or Weibo, you know the system will constantly push you to follow somebody every time you enter this app. So in TikTok, it's the same. So it's possible you follow somebody and in the end, and you never ever check that person's video again, but you have already followed that guy. So that number might be inflated this way in a big, big scale. So.
hmm. So now we go into the tweets. So the first tweet that I have is the Wall Street Journal and Fortune and others. Everyone's now predicting that U.S. housing prices are overvalued, and there's going to be a strong correction in 2023. Goldman Sachs is predicting a fall of 5 to 10%. Others seem in line with that. Some saying 10 to 15%, which makes sense because that the housing market is fucking ridiculous in the U.S. at the moment. I was just there and I was really stunned. And you're an idiot if you're buying houses at these prices in the U.S. right now. The Fortune has an article that is a report that they just did on more than 215,000 data points from more than 2,000 U.S. cities and towns across the U.S. to find the best places to live for the sandwich generation, people in their late 30s who are trying to juggle the needs of both their growing kids and their older parents. So, where are the best places to live? Where did the link go? And the ranking, it says, here we go. The ranking is based on 5 broad categories: education, aging resources, general wellness, financial health, and livability. Does anyone want to guess the top 10 best places to live in America now? And I like, well, actually, I have the top 20. And I like that they did this because, as we were just discussing with the lady working at SFO, the Bay Area is no longer livable for many people. And the answer, as Robert said, is you. Why is everyone forcing themselves to move into these metropolises? Well, we've been doing this for a few decades now, and we're now at the end of that program. It no longer makes sense to move into the metropolises for most people. You need to move to a new place, like we did before that trend, like his parents did and my parents did. My parents moved from Los Angeles when they were kids growing up to San Diego, which was still developing as a beach community. And San Diego has boomed so much over the past 40 years that the land there is ridiculously, insanely valuable, and they can have a nice early retirement on that. Great, as they should. But it would be ridiculous for me to assert that I should be able to afford to live in Los Angeles. I should do the same as they did and move somewhere else where I can afford to live and wait 40 years and wait for the land to grow in value and appreciate in value so that I can have the same sort of benefit that they had. I don't know why people have such a hard time with this understanding of moving to a smaller city.
Hey, Tyler,
Yes.
can I ask a question about that? So, given what most projections show about climate change and the fact that larger parts of the country will become less habitable and larger parts of the world become less habitable, those climate zones that tend to be cooler are in increasingly scarce supply. So, how do you factor that into the return to um, more rural locations when the number of rural locations, as you've called out many times,
Yeah.
um, are increasingly scarce? The intersection of rural, affordable, and climate
Yes.
change resistant, it is a very small subset.
Great
Well,
question.
are you talking the world or are you talking about the U.S.? Because
Great.
two
Both,
different answers.
both.
Right. So
Well, keep in mind, we only live on less than 10% of our land. And I think climate change has a different, I mean, in the metro areas, I totally agree. They're going to have challenges. But I think there's going to be, I mean, if you look, this is coming from a geographer, but if you look at it, I think the U.S. is going to be in a way better position if people opt to move and we strategically lay out the adjustments. But the rest of the world, yeah, they're fine.
well, there's also the bizarre realization that the where people are moving to in the U.S. at the moment, the biggest net growths have been Texas, which makes a lot of sense economically, makes no sense environmentally. Uh, it's to me a short. I just shake my head at the short term thinking there. And Florida again makes all this great sense economically. It makes no sense environmentally
Yeah,
in both.
climate change just totally impacts Florida.
I I really just shake my head at the short term thinking of my friends moving to both of those areas. Um,
Mm.
I I get it on the short term. I get it in the 5 to 10 year term, but even in at 10, I start to get anxiety at the thought of being. Texas is going to boom, by the way, economically in for the near future, in part due to its relationship with Mexico and other factors. But man, environmentally, it's just going to be a real struggle. So anyway, it's a great question, John. I personally I take the long term perspective of I particularly don't want to be in a metropolis as much as I love Tokyo. Um, and I my main order of thinking is my own water, food, energy supply in a environment that has a growing amount of water, not a decreasing amount of water precipitation on an annual basis, as best as one can calculate it, and um, a net exporter of food and energy, or at least a country that's not importing, or a territory or a state that's not importing or overly dependent on importing energy and food, and has an increasing amount of water and a stable, kind of democracy for the most part, and a pacifist sort of posture, particularly with its neighbors, and ideally a very pacifist population who greatly value um, peaceful coexistence with their neighbors. Um, these are the types of variables that I prioritize even above um, economic short term, benefit. Uh, and maybe I'm just a long term viewer, but and maybe that's a privilege that I don't know. I don't I To each their own. So this article is based on, and this is important, what categories that they're focused on. And again, it's education, aging resources, general wellness, financial health. So they're prioritizing the financial health over, and then livability, whatever that means. I assume that means, you've got Amazon delivery on tap. So, what do we imagine are the highest ranking cities in America according to this study of 215,000 data points in 2007?
Is there a minimum size to the cities? Are they like at least 100,000 or what? Any of that?
Some of these I've never heard of.
Okay, I'm assuming that there's going to be a handful of them that are college towns. So, like in Ann Arbor, Bloomington, Indiana, Ann Arbor, Michigan, and then a few places in Iowa and Minnesota.
Rust Belt, plus some places in the Rust Belt.
Robert just pulled
Phoenix
an all
or
timer. Number one on the list is Ann Arbor.
It
Unless
makes
you're
sense.
the Ohio State fan.
Hey, I'm a Hoosier, and I knew it was going to be that because when you look at it, they got healthcare, they got jobs, they got research, they got the whole spectrum of job types that you have there, and not far from it's not far from old-fashioned manufacturing for some people and new tech too. So they cover everything in that corridor there.
You know what's crazy about this personally for me is my uh, great grandparents from Poland on my mother's side, when they arrived in America, settled in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And so now
Really.
we could go full circle and end up in Ann Arbor, Michigan, if we're going to move back to the U.S. That would be a hoot. Anyway, they were ahead of their time. So the
Oh,
Airbnb.
Tyler, one other thing about climate change in the U.S. is we also have to keep in mind also we have like one of the best land masses with navigatable rivers that many other countries just don't have. Just the
Okay.
tributaries of Mississippi, the Ohio, there's so much that
Yep.
even if climate change impacts the perimeter, the heartland is still pretty solid.
Yeah. So number two is Wiley, Texas, outside of Dallas. Olathe, Kansas, which I've never heard of, is number three. Mason, Ohio, I'm not familiar with. Morrisville, North Carolina, I've barely heard of. Clearfield, Utah, I've never heard of. Gatesburg, Maryland, I've never heard of. Leesburg, Virginia, I've barely heard of. West
College
Chicago,
town.
I've heard of. Novi, Michigan, I'm not familiar with. West Windsor,
It's
New
a
Jersey,
suburb of Detroit.
yeah. Tustin, California, I only know of because I'm from Southern California. South Portland, Maine, of course, everyone's heard of. Woodbury, Minnesota, I've not heard of. And Parsippany, Troy Hills, New Jersey, and Brookline, Massachusetts. I have heard of Brookline. Sugarland,
Did they say Troy?
yes.
Okay.
Sugarland, Texas, Iowa City, Iowa, Maryland Hills, Missouri, San Marcos, California, where I'm practically from, actually, in San Diego County, and just down the road from there. And there you go. And so most of them are, nobody towns. They're quite small. And, well,
I just
Tyler,
sent
it's
you.
funny you say that they're nobody towns because like Gaithersburg would probably have a lot of military slash federals guys that live there. Troy Hills, Parsippany Troy Hills just had a big financial fintech company move out there. So it's interesting. I'd be curious to where they pulled this data from.
Yeah,
And also I know the company that did it, and they literally sold their office in Jersey City and moved out there.
and each one of them are at least an hour to an hour and a half from a major airport.
Tyler, I just sent you another list that was released like less than a week ago, but this ranking is a bit different from yours, and it's based on what the things that matter most to people. Economic opportunities, quality of life, diversity, and where the best futures lie. The first one apparently is Atlanta, Georgia. Second one is Tempe, Arizona.
those are
Third
bigger
is,
cities, yeah.
yeah, you can take a look.
Tempe is a huge university town,
Yeah.
Yeah,
but
number two.
Arizona is not climate stable. It's
Mm.
hot now and short of water now.
Oh yeah,
Oh, yep.
TSMC is
Okay.
going there.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
I live in Phoenix, which is, 15 minutes from Tempe, and I've been here for 50 years. We've used up all the water.
Yeah, isn't TSMC a very water intensive industry?
Exactly.
yeah. So
Exactly.
they're
Don't
gonna
ask me
build
how they're going to make all that work.
recycle, recycle. They will recycle their water as many times as possible. That's how they do in Taiwan as well. So
Also,
it,
that's why I was encouraged that they're looking at putting chip factory up in upstate New York, which has plenty of water and open land.
Yeah,
Okay.
I wonder if the TSMC. is more about chip design than chip manufacturing, because it would make no sense for them to locate manufacturing.
Manufacturing.
But also
TSMC is
Intel is
a
there as
foundry
well. So
service.
Intel,
No, they're doing a huge campus, and they're doing manufacturing.
Yes,
And
they only do
it's
manufacturing.
it's
Well, and
mysterious to me.
it was just reported last week that they're shutting the spigot off for a lot of the farming in Arizona because Colorado River is so dry. They're not rationing. They have pre-agreements as to what the pecking order is for turning water off, and they've started turning water off.
Yes, because the
So
largest users of water in Arizona, where I've lived for the last 50 years, are still agriculture.
right.
And we we have decided we would rather have chips than agriculture. And the farmers have made a fortune on their land, so don't feel sorry for them. It's all big agriculture. It's not family farms.
What was the old saying? Man cannot live by chips alone. Sorry.
Oh yeah, I mean, I'm not judging. I'm just observing that this is where they've gone. And actually, who really owns the water in Arizona is the Native Americans.
Okay, well, let's wrap it there. And we'll do it again tomorrow, Thursday. I hope